lovely to be with you guys today. We'll see how this goes. Is that okay? Yeah? Is the sound okay? Does it sound okay? You are going to be my assistant today, okay? So can you hear me well, or do I need to shout or move? Are you sure that his mic is okay? Okay. My name is Lidia. I'm from Argentina. I have lived in the UK for the last 20 years. I was working in Northern Ireland, first in Belfast and then in another place close to the border between the north and the south, working with this organization called YWAM. It's just modern missionaries, I will say. People from all age and different cultures, different countries. The people that were there in the band at the moment, you have someone from Brazil, you have someone from Mexico, from the States, there's people from, there's more. We have someone from Germany, we have someone from Ireland and Northern Ireland, and I'm missing one. Palestine, we have someone from Palestine. Very interested. If you haven't met her, please meet her. She's with the kids at the moment. I am 50 years old. That's a terrible way to start, especially when you are filming. And there's certain things that when you grow a little bit older, they take longer time to learn, right? Like, for example, during lockdown, a lot of people were like, oh, I'm bored, I want to learn something. So suddenly, people started buying guitars and keyboards and Zumba dancing videos and what else? Crochet and knitting. People started learning. People started getting dogs, pets, painting. Everyone started baking. And you saw all these videos online. 2 years down the road, I wonder how many keyboards and guitars and exercise videos are full of dust in the corner because we are not following that up. I just wonder. When I was 40 years old, I realized that I wanted to learn something new. And I have to tell you, at that moment, I didn't drive. And everyone said, oh, driving is okay, it's easy. Kids, being 16, 17 years old, drive. On the other hand, I had a friend of mine, and she knows me, and she knows that I will be talking to you, and suddenly I see a bird, and I'm like, oh, something shiny, and I keep going. So she said to me, if you learn how to drive now when you're 40 years old, I am going to do something that is even more difficult. I'm going to learn, and I think the first thing that crossed her mind was, I'm going to learn Mandarin. I'm going to speak Chinese. And I said, challenge accepted. I'm going to tell you the end of the story later. In my first class, I'm sitting in the car. And I am ready, and I'm a bit scared, excited, but at the same time, I want to drive. I put the car in first gear, I start to go, and guess what happened? A squirrel. Squirrel? Am I saying that? Is that a good accent? Yeah. Squirrel. As I'm starting going, I put in second, and I see a squirrel crossing the road, and I did this. With the car. It was my first shock because the man who was my instructor, very patient man, he actually brought the wheel back into ride, and I stopped. And in that moment, he said, Lidia, you may think that you're driving with your feet or you're driving with your hands, but in reality, you're driving with your eyes. And that was a very strange thing to say. But what he meant is this, and he explained it a little bit later. We will go where our eyes go. Our attention the hands on the wheel, even my feet, when you're driving, everything happens. When you see something, your brain sees something, interprets it, and responds. So, of course, if you want to drive to your... Is this right or left? My assistant? This is my right. Thank you. If you want to drive, if you got to go to your right, I'm not going to do my hands like that and go that way with my face. My face looks in one direction, and my hands, my whole body, my position goes into that direction. It's something very simple. But in that moment, this is what I realized. Imagine this. Jesus is walking in the street. Well, he's walking on the fields. And suddenly he says to the people, hey, look. Look how the plants are ready. Everything is ready for harvest. You ask the Lord of the harvest to send more people into the harvest. Jesus uses things that are ordinary to teach us lessons that will stick in our hearts. He's looking around another place, and I've been in Israel and in Jerusalem. I was up in the hill, and it's beautiful green, beautiful hill with green and big white buildings, old buildings, and you think, wow, the streets are so old, and so many people probably walked there, and there were donkeys and so many things. And yet, I look on one side of the hill, and I saw a whole area with white stones. And you know what? It looks so pretty. In the sun was shining on the white stones, and I said, that is lovely, what is it? And I was told, it's a cemetery. When Jesus talks about being hypocrites, when Jesus said, be careful, because sometimes our lives could look like those lovely white stones. They're beautiful on the outside, but on the inside, they don't smell very good. Jesus always used very ordinary things to bring extraordinary teachings. And I think in that moment, with my instructor, I realized that it was something very, very similar. In that moment, I know that it was just a driver, but in that moment, it looked as if Jesus was there with me saying, imagine a modern Jesus, your driving instructor, with you, sitting in the car and saying, wherever your eyes go, your life will follow. A simple teaching. Wherever your eyes go, your whole life will follow in that direction. Simple truth. Look at the road ahead, and the car will follow your eyes. I imagine in that moment, Jesus could also have said, if you don't want to have any accident, stop looking at your phone while you're driving, and then it's going to be okay, right? That would have been a good lesson as well. Wherever your eyes go, your life will follow. Now, there's another man in the Bible who probably is not as poetic, but it still gives us a very good picture. And I'm talking now about Paul. In the book of Corinthians, Paul is saying, I'm not going to use that one, I'm going to use Hebrew. In the book of Hebrews, the writer is talking about a race. And he says, look, you are running a race. Hebrews chapter 12. You are running a race, and there is a lot of people around you. Sorry, I'm going to do something, probably it's better. Yeah, that's nicer. As you're running the race, there's a lot of people around you cheering you on. And they're saying, come on, you can do it. They're all the people that by faith obeyed God and followed Jesus, one way or the other. But then the writer says, but there's someone else that is cheering you on that you need to look at. And if you look at him, if your eyes go straight into him, your life will follow. I put the verse there because it will be probably easy for the timing. But in Hebrews 12, chapter chapter 12, verse 2, it says, fixing our eyes on Jesus. He's the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand on the throne of God. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. We all know that verse. Is that correct? We've probably heard the verse so many times. And yet sometimes we can get stuck only in what we hear in our minds. What does it mean, fixing our eyes on Jesus? What does it mean to look at him when everything around me is unstable, is shaking, or is boring? How does it look like to be focusing on Jesus when my friends or my co-workers are living their lives on their own and their lives are so different from my life? How do I practically look at Jesus? I want us to explore in the next couple of minutes another story in the Bible. I like stories. And this is a story of a man who did amazing things. If you have your Bibles, you can find the story in 1 Kings chapter 19. But if you don't have your Bibles, or if you don't want to take your Bibles, you can read it here. I hope the writing is okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit about Elijah. Now, Elijah was a prophet, and it was during a really, really crazy time in Israel. Basically, there was a king and a queen in power, and they were doing everything that God said not to do. As simple as that. Now, let's read this passage. Is that okay? Ahab is the king, okay? And he told Jezebel, his wife, the queen, all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. Then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he may die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Let me share a little bit of the background of the story. This is an extremely evil regime. It came to the point where the parents, were grabbing their children and sacrificing them in altar in order to obtain God's favor. It was bad. It was really bad. The people were following God's law, were being persecuted. And the king and the queen had the power to actually kill you if you didn't obey their decrees. It was a really dark time. Way long ago were all the good prosperity times when King David and King Solomon. The people of Israel were in a very, very dark time. But before this moment, before what we read in the story, you know what happened? Elijah came to a point and he said, enough, enough. How long will you be going from one God to the other? When are you gonna make a decision? And he called everyone and said, hey, all of you, the prophets of this God called Baal, a pagan, a fake God, come to a sacrifice, call unto your God, and let him show if he has any power. And they did, and they tried, and they shouted, and they screamed. And all the people of Israel were around, and they were looking at him. And they saw that nothing happened. God didn't show up. And he started even laughing and saying, hey, your God maybe went to sleep, or maybe he's checking his phone. He's not around. He didn't pay attention to you. And then he said, okay, now let's see what's happened now. Let's go call unto God. He repairs the altar of the Lord that had been broken down. But he said, hey, let's gonna make it a little bit more complicated. So not only the stones around, but he made sort of like a gap all around the pile of stones, like a really big gap. And he said, let's put water into this. So the water filled all that gap. And then they put an animal on top and put more water, more water, more water. Now, can you imagine? If the whole area is so wet, it's not going to catch fire because it's actually not dry, it's very wet. But then he called unto God and he said, God, show that you are who you say you are. And in that moment, fire came from heaven and not only consumed the animal that was on top of the altar, but it even licked the water and made everything dry again. And everyone in Israel in that moment fell on their faces and they started saying, God is God. That is our God. Now, can you imagine yourself being as brave and courageous as to say to a big bunch of people, I know who God is, and I'm going to pray, and God is going to show himself with a crazy miracle. It's just incredible to imagine that. But that's what he did. There are other stories before that. Elijah is walking, and he meets a widow, and his son died. And he says, okay, he prays, and this boy comes back to life. There's so many other stories when actually Elijah called unto God and God showed his power. But suddenly, we see a different Elijah. For some reason, after this incredible victory, he's afraid. And somehow, Elijah stops seeing God on the throne and sees that the queen has power to kill him. And for a moment, it looks as if all the past victories disappear. He doesn't have memory of any of them. And he realizes that he's afraid, that he's tired, and that he doesn't want to go on. Does it seem familiar? Elijah stopped seeing God on the throne, and fear took place in his life. And I'm glad there is someone like Elijah, because if someone like him can show that in the moment of tiredness and fear, his vision was blurred and out of focus, then I see how many times I do the same. And yet, there's an invitation, because the story doesn't finish there. So what I want to invite you again in the next couple of minutes is to look at 5 things. A couple of things that Elijah did, but also a couple of things that God did. And you know what? This story is amazing. There's so much more. Like if we were in a Bible study and we were separated in groups, we can go to the story, we can even have a role play and see and imagine and take so much life in the story. But we're only going to focus on a couple of things. Because this crisis takes the Lord out of focus for Elijah. He takes it out of the throne, and instead, what he sees is that he is in grave danger. Now, what changed? Because he had always been in danger before. Like under this regime, under the king and this queen, his life always was in danger. There was a moment when he prayed and he said, there's not going to be more rain. Can you imagine someone in Wales saying, no more rain? And 3 years later, he said to the king, hey, run quickly, because I'm going to call on the name of the Lord, and there's going to be rain again. And just like that, rain came. But in that moment, he forgets that by his power, by the power in his trust in God and his words, God will answer his prayers. And he ran away. Fear. The first thing that I want to bring into your attention is this. When Elijah runs away, for a moment, it looks as if he is taking his life in control. He is making a decision. In that moment, we don't see him asking a question and saying, God, what should I do? He responds to fear. So he looked at the queen, he looked at the threat, he looked at the, I'm going to kill you, and he follows that direction and runs away. But what did God do? The first point that I want to bring into our minds is that God never stopped being God. Elijah runs. And again, if you have any time in the afternoon, keep reading the story because it is fantastic. He runs, he's trying to run away. And yet we see that later on in the story, God comes to him and says, hey, I think you are tired. Have a meal. And an angel appears, and there's food for him, and there's also water. Very good. He eats the food, he drinks the water, and falls asleep. Then an angel wakes him up again. Can you imagine being woken up by an angel? Say, hey, your favorite meal is here. Have some sustenance, eat, drink. He did it, and then he said, now stand up and wake up. Well, wake up, stand up, and go for a walk. And he goes for a walk for 40 days. And after the 40 days, he goes inside a cave, and he hears the voice of God saying, hey, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here, Elijah? How many times has God asked that question? The question seems a bit silly. God knew what he's doing. He could have said, I ran away because the queen tries to kill me. But in that moment, Elijah responds, and he says something very different. He says, I am here alone. All the people of Israel have abandoned your altars. They are killing each other. No one follows the Lord. I am the only one, and now they want to kill me. He complains, and God listens. And God listens. God never stopped being God. He stayed near, and he asked the questions. He asked him, what is in your heart? What is really troubling you? How do you feel? And I believe that whenever our lives full of fear or discouragement or hopelessness, we even stop knowing what's really in our hearts. We're just confused and tired, and we forget that God is there so near asking, what's really in your heart? What is going on? God enters into conversation. Instead of saying, hey, in that moment you should have spoken clearly and a miracle could have happened. God doesn't. God is patient, gives him food, makes him sleep. And they say, okay, what's going on? The God who is patient, the God who wants to know what's in our hearts, the God who wants to hear your voice, the God who wants to share your life, never stop being God. If we look at Elijah now, we see, I'm going to read his answer. Elijah maximizes the crisis but forgets the victory. The first thing that he said is, the people of Israel have left your altar. They left your worship. Is that true? It's a tricky question. Well, just in a couple of verses before, we see that Elijah himself repaired the altar of the Lord. And the people came around the altar And when they saw the fire coming from heaven, they all fall on their knees and they say, God is good. But somehow, when God asked him, what are you doing here? He says, the people of Israel have all forgotten about you. But he's just coming from a victory when the people of Israel saw God work. Somehow the threat of the queen made all his victories look very small. And he forgot that God had come through plenty of times to show his name and his power through him. How many times do we do the same? We have a problem at home, and in reality, God never says your problem is not big enough. The problem was real for Elijah. The king and the queen had the power to kill him. But that wasn't the point. The point was that God was bigger than the king and the queen. How many times we've been waiting a prayer that doesn't seem to be answered. We've been praying for someone in our family that doesn't know Jesus, and we look and we say, this is never going to change. Never going to change. That person will never come to know God as a father. And we are tired, and we lose hope. And we forget that God is the one who starts the good work, but also finishes. We forget that he is faithful and that all his promises are true. The point here is not that our problems aren't real, but that there is a God bigger than any crisis that still wants to show his love, his goodness, his kindness, and his faithfulness. And whenever we are tired or in pain or hopeless, we forget that God has been faithful in the past, and there is still the opportunity for us to see his faithfulness today. The next thing that Elijah did as a result of his fear, he goes into isolation. First of all, he left the servant in another city, and he kept walking and tried to stop his life. But that servant has been walking with him before, even during the time of risk and problem. Elijah left him alone. Elijah took the decision to be isolated. And that's not it. Whenever, only 2 chapters before 1 of Kings chapter 19, I think it's chapter 17, Elijah is running away. And there is a man, there is a captain of the army, and his name is Obadiah. Interesting name. And Obadiah comes to him and he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah says, I'm going to present myself to the king. I've been running away. And Obadiah says, please don't do that. I'm so afraid that if I leave you, the Lord is going to take you away and he's going to protect you, and the king is going to come and take my head off. But also Obadiah said to him, you know what? During this time of this king and this queen, I actually took 100 prophets of the Lord and I hid them in caves. I gave them food and I gave them water. Was Elijah alone? Was he the only prophet left? Not only he has forgotten that God has come through plenty of times before, he actually forgot this story, that there were another 100 prophets of the Lord that had been hidden. But he feels alone. And he says to God, I am alone, I am the only one, and now they're also trying to kill me. Doesn't that sound also like he's telling God, hey, I'm alone, you left me alone? Sounds a little bit like accusation. He believed the lie that he's alone. And because he believed the lie, he feels alone and even feels rejected as if God was not on the throne. God does a couple of things after that. I'm really skipping a bit of the story here. As I said, this is for a Bible study, not just for a teaching. But when he's in that cave, God said to him, I'm going to show to you my power. And then there's an earthquake. There is a storm. There is a hurricane. And he thinks, oh, is that God? But he doesn't see God in that moment. And then suddenly, there is a still, small voice. And in that moment, Elijah gets out of the cave because he knows that God is there. But the first thing that God does to him, he says, for a second time, what are you doing here, Elijah? God asked the question again. And you know what? Even after all that display of power, Elijah said exactly the same. The people of Israel have left you. No one cares about you. They're trying to kill me. I'm the only one left. His mind is so focused on the crisis and the fear that he cannot even see the earthquake, the storm, or even sense that in that question, God is saying, I'm still here. I'm here with you. And the first thing that God said to him is, go. Go to Israel, and you're going to anoint another king that is going to take over the king and the queen that are in place. Then you will go to Assyria, and you're going to anoint another king also for that country, Syria. But also go to another town, and you're going to see a man called Elisha. Sorry, my accent will mix the two names. Elisha, the second prophet. He's going to be prophet after you. What is God doing at that moment? He's targeting the three main power seats of the time. The political power in Israel, the kingdom, that Elijah thought is out of control. The kings that are there are not following the Lord, and this is enough. And God says, no, another king is going to succeed them. You go and anoint another king, and that king is going to make things right. That is the power of Israel. Then he says, go into another country. The country, Syria, was a country enemy with the people of Israel. And God says, you are going to anoint there another king as well. Since when a prophet of Israel had the power to anoint someone else in another country? God is giving him the authority, saying, you see, I'm not only the God of Israel, I am also the God for other nations, even the nations that look like your enemy. And finally, he says, someone else is going to follow you after. There's going to be another prophet to follow you. You're not alone. And you know what God says at the very end? I will keep 7,000 knees that haven't knelt to a different God. Elijah, you are not alone. I was always in control. I am paraphrasing. God never used the word control. But don't we need to hear this with fresh language and fresh ears? Never, ever, ever, the king and the queen, with all their threats in his life, they never had the last word. God had the last word because God was on the throne. And the last point that I want to present is, God asked Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah answered the question. God didn't say to him, you're wrong, you're lying, and you're exaggerating. You're running away because you're afraid. God simply said to him, go. God renews Elijah's calling. Elijah was called to be a prophet. And for God, that never changed. Elijah wanted to stop being a prophet and say, this is enough. Let me die, God, because I am no good. Suddenly, not only he sees the problem big, but he sees his life as less valuable. And God said, go. I still have a mission for you. I still have something for you to do. It's not finished. It's only finished when I say that it's finished. Guys, 5 points that probably you're going to forget in 5 minutes whenever you have a sandwich and a cup of tea. But from the beginning to the end, from Genesis to Revelation, we see the same pattern. And the pattern is this. A woman is looking at the tree, and they see that the tree is beautiful and it looks good to gain power. But she forgets that God is on the throne, and God said, don't touch the tree. What she sees, she touches. We know the fall. We know the rest of the story. On the other hand, you have a little boy walking around in front of an army. Well, he's a teenager, and it's a giant that comes. And he says, I don't see the giant. I see the God that is beyond the giant. My God is bigger. Even with these 5 stones, I'm going to cut up your head. I'm going to bring victory over the people of Israel. That's David and Goliath. We see another man. Well, actually, there are a couple of friends. They're all in a boat, and there is a storm, and it's pitch dark outside. They can't see anything, and suddenly they see light, and they think, oh, it's a ghost. Woo! And they all get very, very scared. And the ghost speaks, and he says, I'm not a ghost, I'm Jesus. And Peter, brave Peter, he says, if you are Jesus, call me, let me walk on the waters. And Jesus says, come. And Peter starts walking, but suddenly he senses the winds, he sees the waves, and he starts falling down. Our eyes focus on something, and our life takes that direction. King David saw God bigger than Goliath, and that gave him the power to face the enemy. Peter saw the waves being strong, and that made him fall. What is our focus? Because whatever we're looking at, with our heart and our lives, we will follow that direction. The last story is a story of a young man, and he thought that he was actually righteous, and he was doing well. But he had a lot of money, and he says, Jesus, what can I do to have eternal life? Because I have been very good. And Jesus says, leave everything behind and follow me. And in that moment, that young guy, saw that his life was on the throne. It wasn't just about richness and treasures and material possessions. His desire for comfort, his security, his status, his reputation, his life was on the throne, more than God. What are we seeing today? Come. What are we looking at today? What is in our focus? Because if I am not paying attention, and I have a prayer that I've been praying for a while, and I think that that's all I need, and that need becomes my source of energy, my desperation, my desire, that I cannot even hear God saying something, then probably it shows that I am the one on the throne. What is in my focus? What am I looking at really with the eyes of my heart? Is it possible that there is a crisis in church or at home or in work that somehow is taking not only your energy and your prayers, but it's making you think, this is never going to change, ever, ever. And it's breathing fear into your ears. I wonder how many times we are ready to quit just when the answer was around the corner. And I feel like probably some people here feel just tired. You've been in battles before and for a long time. And you've seen victories. But the crisis at the moment feels like too much. And it feels like there's nothing left for you to do. And I wonder if today the invitation for all of us is to say, God, I need my eyes to be refreshed. I need my perspective to change. I need to see you on the throne instead of seeing myself, or instead of seeing this crisis that looks like it's never going to end. What does it look for you today to focus your eyes in Jesus? A very simple invitation. But today, how do we make it afresh? Where in your life, where do you need to see Jesus? The invitation is to go back and say, God, these are my eyes. Change them again. Give me a new perspective. Show me who you are again. No matter if I've been your son for ages. Every day. The choice is every day. When I get up of bed to say, God, today I choose to see you on the throne and not my problem. You on the throne and not my circumstances. You on the throne and not my need. So wherever you are, I invite you. If you want to, just don't look at me anymore. I'm not as fun. Where you are, just take one couple of minutes and say, God, where do I need fresh vision today? And take this moment. It's between you and God. And He's asking you, where are you? Where are you today? What is in your heart? Are you hiding? Are you tired? Are you afraid? Are you ready to give up? Wherever we are today, let's bring that to God.